One of the big stories of the week has been the treatment of women, the resulting sort of legislation which is coming through the Police and Crime Bill, which Helen Dale will be talking to us about in a short while in the next hour, as far as the way that women are asking for more protection from the law in the wake of the terrible murder that we saw, of course, taking place. So there's an inquest going on even as we speak today into Sarah Everard's death. There's somebody who's been charged with her murder, so we can't say too much about that. But ministers yesterday sort of caved into an awful lot of pressure from an awful lot of women MPs and women in the House of Lords, basically telling the police to treat misogyny as a hate crime. We're going to be speaking to Christine Jardine from the Lib Dems shortly. Claire Fox, a woman that we speak to here on this show on quite a regular basis, said this yesterday on Twitter: attempting to use domestic abuse bill as a vehicle for counting misogyny hate in all crimes with a complication on gender and sex abandoned yesterday as the Conservative government promised Labour that a pilot rolled out nationally in Nottingham shouldn't happen. My opposition stands. You can be labelled misogynist based on perception. Well, that's entirely how it will be delivered, because the way that apparently misogyny will be judged by the police is whether or not the victim believes or perceives that the crime was motivated by hostility based on their sex. And I can see all kinds of problems with this, because at the end of the day, anything which the police can do which is based on a perception from somebody else is surely the wrong way to go about the law and the carrying out of that law and the rolling out of that law, because the whole point about the law is that you should be able to know when a law is being broken. You should be able to know what the law actually states and where the law actually is. Let's talk to Christine Jardine now and find out what she makes of it all. Christine, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. I know you were having a few problems there. I don't know if you heard what I was saying, but my slight issue with this is that I'm not entirely certain how easy it's going to be for either the police or indeed the judiciary to work out where the lines are.
Well, that's the whole point of this amendment, is to help them to do that. A lot of police forces across England have already been collating figures and looking, if you like, recording crime by sex, if you like. And I think that's what we have to do. Misogyny, yes, I appreciate what you're saying. It's difficult to define, but we have to appreciate in this country, I think, that we have a problem still, a serious problem. And we saw over the past week just how seriously people, women especially, feel about the violence that we face in this country regularly. And the importance of this is that it will move us towards making, if the government accepts it when it comes back to the Commons, misogyny a hate crime. Because we have to do something. The figures are just frightening. And during the pandemic, it's been worse. So it's not going to be, I appreciate that people will think it's difficult. Some people will not like it, but I think we have to just grasp the bull by the horns and do something.
No, I accept that. But I mean, doing something is sometimes the wrong thing, because when you get to the point where you think we must do something based on figures which are slightly iffy, in my view. I was reading a piece this morning in the Times by Joanne Williams, who's basically talking about this 97% figure that we keep hearing about that UN Women found in a study. The problem with that study is that they asked women what happened to them, and it ranged from sexual harassment to feeling uncomfortable. Now, I'm by no means defending misogyny, and I'm certainly not defending the sexual harassment of women. Obviously, I've got a daughter, I've got a mother, I've got a sister, I've got female friends, none of whom I would wish to see suffering in any way, shape or form. But when you get people quoting figures at you, which we do an awful lot now about almost everything, you've got to be careful that, it's not really 97% of people who have been sexually harassed. And that's what the study is purporting to say.
Well, I don't actually agree with you there, Mike, because I'm probably one of those 97%. And there is...
What, somebody made you feel uncomfortable, or you were sexually harassed?
Oh, actually, a whole lot of things when I was younger.
All of the above.
Yeah. I mean, when I was much younger, when I was a young woman, it was everywhere, and it ranges from cat calls in the street to people making inappropriate advances to being made to feel uncomfortable in your workplace or a social setting or whatever. And it all boils down to an attitude in society that we have to change, that it's somehow acceptable for women. Some people seem to think it's acceptable for women to have to go through that. And it's not just some women, it is all women. We all feel it at some point in our lives. The 97% didn't surprise me at all, because I don't know a woman who hasn't been put in that one of those situations at least. And as I say, many of us, I regard myself as fortunate that the harassment that I have experienced has been at what you might think was the milder or the less serious end of the scale. And I've never faced a serious sexual assault or harassment situation. But that's not good enough.
I get that.
It's just an attitude, and that's what we have to.
Yes, but like everything else, Christine, it's a matter of degree. Let me give you another survey, which was done by YouGov on behalf of Eurotrack. Now, that was a much better survey, in my view, because it was more specific, and it asked about the sexual harassment employed with the four most frequently experienced forms, including someone commenting on your attractiveness directly to you, being wolf whistled at, someone looking at your breasts, and someone winking at you. Now, that came back with 52% of British women saying that something like that had happened to them. So, I get what you're saying, but I think there's a danger here that men will start to feel put upon, that men will start to feel as if they can't talk to women. They'll start to feel as though they are somehow being painted as the enemy, that they're being painted as this ghastly group of individuals, which many men are not, and an awful lot of men are not, and certainly I'm not. And if I knew anybody that was, I would be having a very stern word with them. I also know an awful lot of decent men who do not treat women like that.
Yeah, I was married to one who did not treat women like that. And I have a lot of friends who do not treat women like that. But we need them as well to help us in this. Sure. We need those reasonable men, like yourself, to help us, to support us in this. And that it's not acceptable. Most men know that it's not acceptable. And it's not that we're saying, or certainly I'm not saying, men are all misogynist or men are all guilty of harassment. No, I'm not. What I'm saying is that we need to do something about it, and we need your help.
Yes, no, and I agree. I agree with all of that. But I'm just not certain that with an uncertain law, for example, there are lots of men who complain to me about their rights to see their own children. They get mistreated by the court systems. It's very difficult for a lot of men who get divorced to get access to their kids. They get painted as manipulators. They get painted as misogynists. And I think that if a woman wishes to prevent her former husband from seeing her kids, all she has to say is, "I think he's a misogynist," and there's a law now that will prevent him from doing anything.
No. The thing is, we have to protect women who are victims of violence, and a lot of that is misogynistic. Now, this is where, if you like, the reporting is important, because it's not going to mean that you can just say that person's a misogynist and therefore they will be. There will be recording of crimes, there'll be recording of incidents, there'll be recording of assaults, and that is the key, that we have to have the data, we have to look at it carefully. It has to be recorded.
But what will that do, Christine, for the prevention of crimes? Because if you're going to rape somebody, it doesn't really matter whether you are termed a misogynist. It's pretty obvious that you are, isn't it?
Well, that's where we come to the attitudes in society. We have to, by changing the law, make it absolutely clear that misogynistic behaviour is unacceptable. As is violence against men. Don't get me wrong, violence of all sorts is completely wrong. But misogynistic behaviour is not acceptable. And we begin to change it. We've come a long way in this country. We're not perfect when it comes to incidents of racism. We're far from it. We still have a problem we have to deal with in this country. But we began to deal with it because we recognised it. Misogyny and racism are two different things. But it's a problem that we have to deal with, and we have to recognise it. We have to start to change society's attitudes to misogyny and the way that we are trying with other problems as well.
Yes.
And I think this law, if it passes, if it's part of the domestic abuse bill, will start to change attitudes, will make people think about it. And if police are recording it, then there are people whose behaviour will be influenced by that if they know the police are going to record it. So I think we have to accept this. We have to move on.
Maybe it will have an effect on the lower level type stuff, maybe. But it certainly won't, I don't think, have any effect on people who beat up their wives or their girlfriends or who go around sexually assaulting women, because they're already knowing that they're committing a crime, but they're doing it anyway.
The Domestic Abuse Bill, this piece of legislation, which was in the Lords, and we'll now come back to the Commons for this, it was brought to Parliament originally by Theresa May, and it's taken 4 years. And it has been a very, very difficult piece of legislation. I've actually moved briefs. I'm no longer a Women and Equality spokesperson. I'm a Treasury spokesperson, but I stayed with this bill because I feel it's so important for exactly the reasons that you talked about. And that's why it's been an example of when the House works together. Party lines haven't really mattered in this. I signed this amendment originally when it came forward with Stella Creasy from the Labour Party. Lots of my colleagues in Lib Dem do. And there were supporters on the Conservative benches. A lot of the amendments and the measures in this bill are completely cross-party, because we recognise what you're saying. There are very serious crimes and we have to deal with them properly. So this bill is an attempt to get to grips with something which is a horrific scourge in our society. The number of people who face domestic violence and other sorts of abuse on a daily basis, and it's been heightened by the pandemic. Other parts of the bill I would have liked to see improved. Yes, it doesn't, for example, recognise the Istanbul Convention. We need more to help migrant women. But by having misogyny, hopefully, included in it, we begin to break down one of the really big problems in this country. And as a society, I think it's absolutely vital that we deal with this problem. And it destroys people's lives. And we can't go on allowing that to happen.
Okay. Christine, thanks very much indeed. Christine Jardine, Lib Dem MP for Edinburgh West. You may have a view on this. I'm sure you do, because I'm not sure that making misogyny separately listed as a crime, as a hate crime specifically, is actually going to make any difference whatsoever. It might even confuse the issue for me.